Tonight, a look at one of the most controversial measures of the General Assembly session, the Religious Liberty Bill, which still faces stormy seas. Opponents of the legislation have gained an unlikely advocate, Mike Bowers, the former Attorney General who fought to keep Georgia's sodomy laws legal in a famous U.S. Supreme Court case. Senator Josh McCoon, author of the Senate bill, joins us. Plus, the top news from our Capitol team under the Gold Dome. Lawmakers starts now. Good evening and welcome to Lawmakers. I'm Bill Nygaard. It is day 21 of this year's session. And as we get closer to crossover day, we're going to look at the prognosis for the religious liberty bills in the House and Senate. Last year, similar measures died before the deadline. What are their chances this year? But before we dig in on this issue, Pat St. Clair brings us tonight's Capitol Report. Pat?
Good evening, Bill. We begin tonight with Mike Bowers. The former Attorney General says he is a changed man, and he says that's why he has no reservations about fighting against two religious liberty bills currently making their way through the Georgia General Assembly. During the 1980s, Bowers was an outspoken opponent of the gay rights movement, even helping persuade the U.S. Supreme Court in a Georgia case to continue classifying sex between gay men a crime. But today, Bowers told reporters that the religious liberty bills are nothing more than an excuse to discriminate.
And I would ask you this, why is the bill needed if not for the purpose of discriminating? To tell a gay couple you can't have a marriage license, or to tell someone, an interfaith couple, you can't have this apartment. Why else do you need it?
During a news conference at his downtown law office, Bowers explained that if passed, the religious liberty bills would open up a religious Pandora's box.
If somebody can say, I need to wear a burqa because of my religion, then I'll guarantee you somebody in the Klan is going to say, well, if they can wear a burqa, I can wear a mask, and that's part of my religion. It's that simple.
Bowers was hired to analyze the religious liberty bills by Georgia Equality, an LGBT advocacy group. The sponsor of the bill in the Senate, Senator Josh McCoon, as you know, is a guest on Lawmakers tonight, and we expect to hear his response to Bowers' statements a little bit later. Well, anyone who has ever been convicted of a crime and served their time might find it difficult to get a job, even though they have repaid their debt to society. In Georgia, about 1,300 people are released from prison each month. Governor Nathan Deal wants to make the hiring process a little bit easier for them. So he has just signed an executive order implementing a ban-the-box policy. We talked with him earlier today to find out exactly what it does.
The ban-the-box is simply the concept that when you're filling out an application for employment, in this case, employment with the state of Georgia, that you would not be required to disclose your full criminal background history. The only ones that would be required to do so would be in those jobs that are sensitive jobs, and that determination would be by agency heads that have those particular positions available. It would give you an opportunity to explain to someone who is the hiring person for an agency of the state what your background was, and if you feel you have had actions that you've taken to make yourself better, to rehabilitate yourself, you would have an opportunity to explain that. The idea in simple terms is not to put people who have had a criminal background history in the posture of automatically having their application for employment with the state of Georgia rejected simply because they checked the box.
Several states have similar measures on the books, but Georgia is the first state in the South to have a ban-the-box initiative. On the Senate floor today, Senator Vincent Ford expressed concerns about his bill not receiving a committee hearing. SB 45 would limit the use of no-knock warrants being used by police agencies.
What we need to do in the Senate is make sure that bipartisanship is not just a word we use to appeal to the public, we need to make sure that bipartisanship is in fact what we do around here. So I'm very concerned that issues of such great public awareness and importance are not being given a fair and full hearing here in the Senate. It's not just that I deserve it, but the people of the state of Georgia deserve it.
Senator Jesse Stone chairs the Senate Judiciary Non-Civil Committee. We reached out to him for a response, but we did not hear back from him by our deadline. And Bill, I understand that Senator Ford is going to be a guest with you tonight on Lawmakers. We look forward to hearing more from him a little bit later in the show. That's it for us. Back to you.
Thanks, Pat. It was controversial last year, and it remains one of the hottest issues down at the Capitol this session. Once again, there are separate House and Senate bills teed up which seek to define and protect so-called religious liberties. Senator Josh McCoon, a Republican from Columbus, is here to explain his Senate version of the bill. And we're joined, too, by Democratic Senator Vincent Fort from Atlanta. He is opposed to this kind of legislation in the state. And, of course, joining us, too, is veteran AJC political writer Jim Galloway, whose daily blog, Political Insider, is required reading for anyone who's interested in Georgia politics. Gentlemen, thank you all so much for being here. Senator McCoon, you dropped your version of the religious liberty bill, which had already been, Sam Teasley had already put his House version in at the very beginning of the session. You just dropped yours beginning of last week, I think, is something like that, right? And let's talk about first what you say your bill accomplishes, and then let's talk about a peculiar twist it took at the end of last week. So what are you trying to accomplish?
Sure. So very simply, 1990, the U.S. Supreme Court dramatically lowered the legal standard government has to meet to infringe on religious liberty. Congress acted in a bipartisan way in 1993 to respond to that, to raise the legal standard back. In 97, the court said that state and local governments would not be under the federal law. And so since then, 30 states, either by state legislative act or through the decision of their courts, have imposed this higher legal standard, making sure that state and local government must meet the highest legal standard possible if they are going to take the extraordinary step of burdening a citizen's individual religious liberty.
Is there an example that you can cite of what would be involved in that? In other words, what give us, if you can, just a hypothetical.
Sure. Well, I'll give you something out of reality.
Okay.
Savannah State University, several years ago, a Christian student organization held a foot washing ceremony on campus. University administrators said that violated a hazing rule and kicked the group off of campus. I mean, it's a bright line display of religious exercise leading to a punishment by a government entity.
Okay, Jim Galloway and Vincent Fort, we can get you into this conversation. Now, Jim, late last week, Senator McCoon's bill was in committee, and thought it was going to be smooth sailing, we assumed, and then Vincent Ford and others stepped in. Why don't you set this up for us?
All right. The one thing that Senator McCoon hasn't mentioned is, of course, yes, the RFRA bill was passed, the federal RFRA bill was passed in 1993. But over the last 2-3 years, we have had this incredible legal push in the court system toward gay marriage. And that, I think you have to, that is driving much of this. We had Senate Majority Leader Bill Cowsert of Athens at the Thursday Senate Judiciary meeting want to add an amendment which he said was correct me if I'm wrong, it was a statement to say that nothing in this bill is intended to override protections against anti-discrimination laws.
It changed the definition of compelling governmental interest.
Right.
And Senator Fort, you jumped on board on that right away, didn't you?
Yeah, well, it seemed that there was a lot of unreadiness, not just amongst the Democrats, but Republicans also, and that's why I made a motion to table the bill. There's a lot of technicalities involved, but the bottom line is that people who wanted to amend the bill didn't have the time because of the committee rules to do just that. So I thought it would be best to table the bill, and I made that motion to table it. I'm very concerned that this bill would be a license to discriminate, and anything we can do an amendment which would ensure that's not the case, very important to the people I represent.
You want to respond?
Sure. This has been the law of the land from the federal level for the last 22 years. It's been the law now in 30 different states. and there's not a single reported case of RFRA being used as a so-called license to discriminate. The opponents have been talking about that for 12 months. They've been unable to produce a single case.
But it's not just the opponents. I mean, we mentioned Mr. Cowsert, who joined Senator Fort,
a Republican
who joined Senator Fort in tabling this bill, and he has come under some furious attack from Tony Perkins of the Family Research Council. It's a national group, much like the Christian Coalition used to be, and for blocking this bill. But Mr. Perkins draws a direct line between I'd say conscience protection for people who don't want to have anything to do with gay marriage or same-sex unions, and the protection that might be offered by this bill.
Well, let's talk about both of those. Senator Cowsert made a very clear statement before offering the amendment that he frankly felt the only reason to bring the amendment forward was for public relations purposes. He talked about the intention of the bill, the history of the bill. He was very clear that this was aimed at trying to quiet this criticism, but that in no way the text of the bill would allow any sort of discrimination. The other point I would make is that 37 states now have same-sex marriage. Many of those states have these RFRA laws on the books, and they're not being used in any way to block or prevent same-sex unions from moving forward.
I take Senator McCoon at face value when he says it's not his intent to discriminate. I know Senator McCoon, I don't think that's his objective. But if there's an amendment, if there's a way to perfect the bill where to ensure that it won't discriminate, which is how I read the amendment, then let's do it. And that's why I think I'm very glad we are going to have enough time. I don't know what's going to happen when the bill comes up next time, but I think we ought to consider that amendment, just like any other amendment, perfect the bill, make sure it doesn't discriminate.
Senator McCoon, let's take a story right out of the headlines recently. Do you believe that if your statute were passed into law, that the former fire chief, Kelvin Cochran, who Mayor Kasim Reed fired, he says because he did not follow proper procedures in getting permission to publish his book, but who others say, well, it was a good thing they got rid of him. He had some anti-gay statements in that book and other things. Is that an example of what you're trying to protect?
No, sir. I mean, I think Chief Cochran has a claim under Title VII of the Federal Code for being terminated for his religious beliefs. I think that's going to play out in the courts. This bill is about establishing a bright line for state and local government policymakers to make sure that we're not putting policies forward that infringe on people of faith. We've seen municipal ordinances banning feeding of the homeless. We've seen things that are just incredible overreach. And in states that have done that with RFRA, like Pennsylvania and Florida, citizens have been able to invoke that law to overturn those overbroad ordinances that infringe on religious liberty.
Then how do you feel about the fact that so many of the people who support the legislation have decided to use Kelvin Cochran as an example of why this is necessary legislation? Would you just soon see them go away?
Well, no. I mean, what I think you see people rallying around Chief Cochran because I think that there's a feeling among many people in this country and in this state that people of faith are under attack. And there's no question that in a lot of other contexts that having a RFRA law will prevent government from stepping on people of faith. That's all we're really trying to do.
Jim Galloway, you had a great exclusive in your column over the weekend. You broke big news. We have an interesting wrinkle in this case. What is Mike Bowers doing in this case, and why is that such news?
He is representing Georgia Equality, coming up with a legal analysis of Mr. McCoon's bill and Sam Teasley's bill, and he's fairly stinging in his comments. The phrase "invidious discrimination" is what he says it would invite, and it's important. He's important because he played such a big role in the gay rights movement back in the 80s. It was an unhappy moment if you're on that side of the equation, but the case Bowers versus Hardwick, an Atlanta-grown case, made it to the Supreme Court in '86 and upheld the right of local governments to criminalize homosexual behavior.
Right.
I'm glad the Kelvin Cochran case is off the table. There have been any number of cases cited to support the Religious Freedom Bill. All of them have been resolved by other means, either in local courts or administratively. I'm really interested to hear that Mike Bowers is involved. Politics makes strange bedfellows sure enough. And this is the strangest of bedfellows. So it's taken an interesting turn. I'm glad he's involved. I think he'll help those of us who are concerned that this will discriminate.
Senator, let me go back to you on this. There have been people who've sat at this table, who've been on our radio show on Friday afternoons, who have said, gee, why do you need a state statute if you already have RFRA, the federal law?
Well, because in the U.S. Supreme Court decided in 1997 that law didn't apply to state and local government actors. And that's why 30 other states have adopted the law that we're trying to pass here in Georgia. I do want to say about Michael Bowers getting involved. I mean, I think it's just another example of how desperate the opposition to this legislation has become. The narrative about license to discriminate has been thoroughly discredited. They then got the district attorney down in Macon involved. There was some very good reporting from the AJC exposing his deep ties to Better Georgia. He's been thoroughly discredited. So they're so desperate to get someone with an R by their name to say something bad about this bill that they've hired Mr. Bowers, and I'm sure they're going to get what they paid for.
Tell me in just a minute, because we have to take a break. Your bill has been sidelined in the Senate for the time being. As Jim Galloway points out, some of the conservative Christian organizations that really are on your side have been lobbying like crazy against the legislators, Bill Cowsard, saying, what the heck did you do? Get back on board. What's your sense of the status of your bill right now and how quickly you can get it back on the calendar?
I feel very good about the prospects for the legislation, and I think it's important to note that there's not a single Republican member of the committee saying that they're opposed to Senate Bill 129. There is a discussion. We're continuing to have that discussion, but I'm very optimistic that we're going to move forward.
Could you find yourself accepting a version of the amendment that was proposed?
Well, you know, for the last year, we were told that we wanted the operative language to mirror as closely as possible federal law, and Senator Cowsert takes us away from that. So I think that we've got to continue to have a discussion about that. I personally believe we ought to be as close as possible to federal law to pick up the 22 years of case history, the fact that no reported case during that 22 years has resulted in any of the parade of horribles the opposition has talked about. So that's why I'm very skeptical about amending the bill.
Okay, thank you for that. Look, stay with us, Vincent Fort and Josh McCoon, Jim Galloway. We're going to be back in just a moment with more, including details on a person of interest at the state capitol. But as we go to break, how well do you know your lawmakers? Steve Henson is a Democrat from Tucker. He represents Senate District 41. Henson was first sworn into the General Assembly in 1991. He's marking his 23rd year in state office. Henson is a capital D Democrat and a capital D DeKalb County resident. His list of elected and civic accomplishments is long and distinguished. He currently has the distinction of serving as the Senate Minority Leader, a post he's held since 2011. But Henson says one of the highlights of his career has been the many years of service for the Board of Directors of the American Association of Adaptive Sports. That's a group which helps disabled children take part in intramural sports. Lawmakers returns in just a minute.
Want to know why? Get the answers you've been seeking on the latest Why Wednesday. First, what's new from the tech scene in Georgia? SciTech Now gets the scoop on cutting-edge restaurant technology and checks out the magic that keeps a local comic store going. It's all on the new episode of SciTech Now, Georgia. Next, where will these intelligent apes survive as their native habitat shrinks? Nature travels to the jungles of Sumatra to see the efforts to protect Asia's only great ape on the last orangutan Eden. Then, how has this remarkable building survived for 800 years on a highly active fault line? Nova explores the massive enclosed dome and tests the seismic secrets of the Hagia Sophia, Istanbul's ancient mystery. Finally, who are the people working to protect our most precious resource? On Earth, a new wild. See the unique and crucial efforts to preserve and improve access to fresh water for both humans and wildlife. Catch the latest from the worlds of science and nature on this week's all-new Why Wednesday.
I call wheat the perfect obesogen. It makes you want to eat all the time.
Learn why our most common food is bad for your health.
We have full control over impulses, appetite, and our lives. You don't.
Make this revolutionary one-step health and weight loss plan work for you. Watch Wheatbelly Total Health with William Davis, MD.
This is not about being gluten-free.
Thursday at 7:30 on GPB.
On this date in 1877, then-Governor Alfred Colquitt approved a bill making it illegal for any person to operate a lottery in Georgia. Specifically, it made it unlawful, quote, to turn any lottery wheel or to draw therefrom any balls, numbers, letters, or other thing indicating the decision of any chance or hazard of the said lottery. Wow! It would be 115 years before lawmakers reversed course on the lottery issue. Welcome back to Lawmakers. We're here tonight with Senator Josh McKoon, a Republican from Columbus, Senator Vincent Fort, Democrat from Atlanta, and our colleague Jim Galloway from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Let's put a couple of Senator Fort's key bills up for discussion at this point. Senator, let's start. Tell us about the bill that you are authoring on no-knock warrants.
Well, over the last year, the issue of no-knock warrants has been a very hot issue. Habersham County, the baby boo-boo case, where there was a no-knock warrant served and almost killed the 19-month-old baby. I've introduced a bill that similar to a bill that I introduced some time ago, raising the bar for magistrates signing off on a no-knock warrant. I'm gratified that over the years, and this year it's gotten bipartisan support. There's a Republican bill in the House. We have my bill in the Senate. There are a lot of things going on. I think it's going to come to a head this week or next week, and something's going to be coming out.
Let me just ask you a question about that. If a law enforcement agency, in the case of Habersham County, the law enforcement says that they had been told that this was a drug house and that there might be weapons inside. Now, they could have taken an application to a magistrate with those details and possibly gotten that no-knock warrant, correct? So it doesn't really necessarily prevent all of this from continuing, does it?
But the House bill sponsored by Kevin Tanner up in North Georgia, in Dawsonville, I think. It would number one require law enforcement agencies to develop a protocol for how you enter a house. It would require training. It would also shorten.
My bill would do the same.
And you'll do the same.
It would also shorten.
Okay, good.
Would yours also restrict the hours that a no-knock could be served?
No, it doesn't. That's one of the only differences between our two bills.
Yeah, Tanner's bill would say no no-knock service between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m.
But the two of you could, across the aisle from one another, both across the Capitol and across party lines, work together on this?
Yeah,
yes?
I like the bill, except it allows evidence collected in a bad no-knock raid to be used in court. But that's something I think can be worked out.
Okay.
I think the main issue of raising the bar for a magistrate is the most important thing.
Senator McKoon, another initiative that Senator Ford has put forward is to require all law enforcement officers in Georgia to wear body cameras. That's been a little bit more controversial. What do you think about that bill?
I agree with him.
Okay.
And I think that Senate Bill 45 is also a step in the right direction on no-knock warrants. We have got to broadly get a hold of some of these issues with respect to law enforcement. And I think that body cameras are good not only for the prospective defendants, they're good for law enforcement. I think that they make law enforcement more accountable, but I think they also protect law enforcement from frivolous claims.
Yeah,
as well.
I should have been, when I said controversial, I think there's a lot of agreement about the body cameras. Paying for them is another matter entirely, right?
That's the big stumbling block.
Do you have some answers for?
Well, it's going to take $38 million in my bill, phased in over 3 years. I think we need to think about our priorities. The fact of the matter is, one bad no-knock warrant case, Miss Johnston, the Katherine Johnston raid in 2006 cost the city of Atlanta $7 million. So I think we need to ask ourselves, can we afford not to do it? And I think that's the issue for me.
And with $900 million of new revenue this year alone, I think Senator Ford is correct. I mean, we have to decide where our priorities are going to be. And the law enforcement folks I talk to, they welcome this, they want it, but they've got to have the financial resources to be able to deploy them.
Jim, at some point, the Senate is going to get the education bill. It hasn't gotten to them yet. Where do we stand on all this?
This is the governor's school rescue bill.
Yeah.
Yes, we've now had 2 hearings in the Senate on it. We had a kind of a star-studded presentation of the bill last week, where we brought representatives from New Orleans and elsewhere where school rescue plans had been enacted. On Monday, we had another presentation by the governor's people that went into the details with some very, very interesting changes, or at least modifications in there. For instance, they would only be accepting 20 schools per year. They would cap it 20 schools per year for bringing them into what the governor is calling the Opportunity District.
You up in Gwinnett, you have a lot of schools on this list, you said.
Well, we have in my home area in Muskogee County, we have
Muskogee, yeah.
We have 20% of the schools in our district that are on that recovery list. And I applaud Governor Deal for bringing this forward. I think if you talk to Governor Jindal, see the experience they've had in Louisiana. We need this tool in Georgia. I've signed the legislation. Look forward to support it.
But 85% of the schools involved total are in metropolitan areas.
Yeah,
so you can see there's a natural partisan divide over this bill.
And I think I have some issues with it. I think we need to look at it a lot harder. We have Democrats have presented a bill, a community schools model, to try to deal with the impediments. We believe all children can learn, but that shouldn't be a reason not to remove the impediments, poverty, healthcare that children face on a regular basis.
Your legislation proposes looking at root causes that you're just discussing.
Absolutely.
All right.
Absolutely.
We are out of time. Senator Josh McCoon, Columbus, thank you so much for being here. We're going to watch with great interest as you work on your religious liberty bill and other legislation. Vincent Ford, thank you, Senator, for coming in. We'll watch your bills go through, too. And Jim Galloway, always a pleasure to have you. Before we get out of here tonight, we want to turn our focus to Representative Mickey Stevens of Savannah, and focus is the operative term. Pat St. Clair sat down with Representative Stevens to talk about his love of cameras.
I taught school for 32 years, and I was an industrial arts teacher. And we took an in-service class, and guys were talking about how easy it was to do black and white photography. And so I took it back to my school, and we tried it, and we started doing black and white photography. Then I went to a Salvation Army store and saw some cameras, and old cameras, and I thought it'd be interesting to have them in the classroom. I have one that goes all the way back to the mid-30s. George Eastman invented film, as we know it today. And Kodak, when the instant cameras came out, Polaroid came out with the instant cameras, Kodak stole some of their patent and created their own cameras. And this is one of them, this is one right here. And Polaroid sued them. And there was a limit, they only made a few of these cameras and sued them, so they had to take it off the market. And when they took it off the market, you had the option of sending the camera back and getting your money back, or keeping the camera because it's a limited edition. So I kept the camera. Polaroid was the first to come with the instant picture. And this is one of the first Polaroid instant cameras. It weighs a ton, and you have to go through maybe 8 to 10 steps to get a picture off it. It was a slow process, but it made instant pictures. And it progressed up to the Swinger. This was a popular camera when I was in high school. And the idea was for kids to learn, and not just the kids on the upper end. Everybody across the spectrum in the classroom got a chance to understand and learn and get success. And that's the idea of it.
Great collection. Thank you, Pat. So, day 21 of the 2015 legislative session is a wrap. We're back here tomorrow night. We'll have the latest news from the Georgia General Assembly. Check us out online at our website, and you can send us your comments too. Email us at lawmakers.org at gpb.org. Thanks so much for being with us. Good night.
This is a GPB original production.